Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohio. So today we're going to be doing a possible 2024 scenario between Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom. If you did not know, there's been a lot of speculation recently among major media outlets that Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, is planning a 2024 presidential run to possibly either primary out Joe Biden, or if Joe Biden were to retire due to age or failing health, possibly just run in an open ballot. Now, is that going to happen? I personally don't think so. I think Newsom should be pretty content where he's at in California. I mean, he's definitely well liked among the Democratic base, which I think would be a good thing. But in terms of Republicans and swing voters especially, I worry how electable he would be. For the Democrats' point of view, obviously as a Republican, I wouldn't be opposed to him running because I think he would be very beatable. But from his point of view, I would think that while he may be very liked among Democrats, he's not the most liked among independents and Republicans. He probably inspire a heavy Republican turnout simply against him, and then a lot of independents. If you look at a couple possible polls, independents are not big fans of him either. So, while it's way too early to tell, I thought it'd be kind of fun if we did a quick little scenario for DeSantis, Newsom, the two governors of two of the biggest states. Ron DeSantis, the Teflon Ron in Florida, Big Ron, if you will, absolute Chad, Republican governor of Florida, who is and then taking on Gavin Newsom, who is obviously the governor of California. So kind of like the nation's two biggest, most popular governors among their respective bases. What if they run against each other in 2024? Now I chose Kristi Noem to be DeSantis' running mate, really just because I couldn't think of anyone else. I have no clue who DeSantis would pick as his running mate. Noem seemed like a good option. And then I chose Pete Buttigieg for Newsom because they're having a lot of rumors about Pete Buttigieg possibly also running in 2024. I think that the two of them would make a decent pair to appeal to different bases. Like Newsom would appeal to more, like Clinton type Democrats, and Buttigieg would be like, oh, he would appeal to the white working class types. I don't know what the Democrats would be thinking. Who knows what Newsom would be thinking? Let's get into it. Let's fill in the safe Republican states, which includes states of Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, all of Nebraska except the second district. Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, and the great state of Alaska. The safe states for Gavin Newsom include states of Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, D.C., Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Maine's first congressional district, and probably Maine at large. I don't think DeSantis would have as much white working class appeal as Trump would, making the second district a little bit more competitive and making Maine at large probably safe, because I think Newsom would actually do rather well with Democrats in the first district. So these are all the safe states for each side. No matter what you do, these are going to vote for DeSantis and or Newsom. So now we're going to fill in the likely states for each side. The likely states for DeSantis include states of Texas, Iowa, and Ohio. Meanwhile, and actually Florida as well, and probably Maine's second district. Florida would probably go to DeSantis. He's the incumbent governor there. He's very popular. He's going to win re-election handily. And I think a DeSantis taking on Newsom would inspire heavy Republican turnout, because a lot of Republicans from California, a lot of people moving to Florida are Republicans from California. So I think that Newsom being on the ballot would inspire heavy anti-Newsom turnout from a lot of transplants from other parts of the country, like New York, California, Illinois. And then DeSantis, obviously being from Florida, would help him out quite a bit. I think he would win by about 6 points there. Texas, DeSantis would probably do a little bit better than Trump in the suburbs, but Newsom would also have a lot of appeal to some people in like Austin. I think he'd inspire a decent amount of turnout there. But in the end, I think DeSantis wins Texas by about 8 to 9 points, just because he does so much better with suburbanites in like the Austin, Fort Worth, and not Austin, like the Fort Worth, Dallas area. Iowa and Ohio are both pretty much safe Republican states now, so I think DeSantis would win them by likely margins. He might do a little bit worse with white working class voters and rural voters that like maybe were big fans of Trump. But I think as long as he had the Trump endorsement and he wasn't like running as like this rhino, I think he would still win them by likely margins and still do rather well up there. The likely states for Gavin Newsom include states of Minnesota, Colorado, and Virginia. State of Minnesota, a lot of liberals from California are actually moving to the Minneapolis area. We saw it take a huge shift to the left in 2020. I think voters would actually be big fans of Newsom up there. I think Newsom wins by about 5-6 points. Colorado has been trending heavily away from the Republicans, and while DeSantis would be a decent candidate for the state and doing relatively well in the suburbs, a lot of California liberals have also been moving to California, so I think Newsom would have some appeal there. And I think in the end that Newsom will win the state, although maybe a little closer than people expect. I think Newsom Newsom does still win the state by a likely margin. Instead of Virginia, like I said, similar story. DeSantis would do pretty well with suburbanites, and he would still do decently and he would still probably get close to Trump margins in rural areas. But I think the state's a little bit too far gone. I think Newsom is he's not the best candidate, but he's certainly not a bad Democratic candidate. He would maintain the majority of the Democratic voting bloc, and I think he would win Virginia by a likely margin. Time to fill in the lean states for each side, of which there are several. The lean states for Ron DeSantis include states of North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. The lean states for Gavin Newsom, meanwhile, include states of Michigan and New Mexico. North Carolina's the DeSantis would do pretty well across the entire South, and obviously we see North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. DeSantis being from the South, and he just has a kind of Southern appeal, if that makes any sense. DeSantis has that more like social conservatism, but he also just has that, I guess, persona that I see him doing very well among Southern voters across the Sun Belt. I think he flips back Georgia because he inspires heavy turnout among rural voters, and I think he does a little bit better in the suburbs. I don't think Newsom inspires the heavy African-American turnout that Joe Biden got, and I think DeSantis does win Georgia by a slim margin, he wins Georgia by a slim margin. Instead of North Carolina, DeSantis will probably do pretty much the same as Trump 2020 there. I see him maybe doing a little bit better with suburbanites, and also a little bit better in rural areas. Maybe he outperforms Trump by a tad, but I think pretty much DeSantis wins North Carolina by pretty much the same margin Trump did. Instead of Arizona, I think DeSantis makes major improvements with voters in suburban Phoenix and places like Maricopa County. DeSantis being having a better optics among suburbanites, I think would get them to turn out heavily for him. Arizona is still a relatively Republican-leaning state. It's just not a big fan of Trump. DeSantis would kind of unite that more neoconservative, moderate base, as well as that very Trumpian base in some more rural parts of Arizona. And I think in the end, DeSantis does win Arizona by a pretty sizable margin, probably like 3 to 4 points, because Newsom, he's not well liked in Arizona. A lot of people have moved out of California over the last 10, 20 years or so to get away from his policies. And I think Newsom being on the ballot would actually inspire heavy suburbanite turnout for DeSantis. State of Nevada, a decent amount of conservatives have moved from California to Nevada. I think they would be very inspired to turn out. With Nevada also shifting heavily to the Republican Party, I think DeSantis would do very well with Hispanics, and I think he would probably win the state by about a point or two. Instead of Wisconsin, I've kind of gone back and forth. Wisconsin is a pretty Republican trending state. And while I don't think DeSantis would get the Trump margins in like the rural white working class areas, I think he would still do decently across in those areas, while doing very well across the WoW counties and suburban Milwaukee. Trump did decently in that part of the state, but he didn't do as well as most Republicans normally do. I think DeSantis would get the heavy Republican support from the WoW counties, as well as hold the line in white working class areas, allowing him to win Wisconsin by a little bit more than a point. That's all I gotta say there. Instead of Michigan, meanwhile, Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer, for some reason, just always kind of strike me as just very similar personas politically. So I think that Newsom would win Michigan by a lean margin. I think DeSantis would heavily underperform with white working class voters, similar to the rest of the Rust Belt, while Newsom would still do very well with suburban women and in the suburbs in general, such as Grand Rapids. I think he would accelerate some of those trends, and also he would still do well with African Americans in the Detroit area. So I think Newsom does win Michigan by about a point or two, kind of the opposite of Wisconsin. New Mexico, heavy Hispanic population, and with being in the Sun Belt, I think DeSantis does do very well in the state. I don't think he wins it, but I think he makes it pretty close. I think if DeSantis was a solid campaign, which it seems like he would do if he were to run against Newsom, and he would win this. He would only lose the state by a couple of points, probably like Mark Ronchitti's 2020 margin, only losing by about 4. I think DeSantis, his pro-family policies and stuff like that would do very well with Hispanic voters, and him being just a little bit more optical, I think would help him with suburbanites, allowing him to lose New Mexico, but by a very respectable margin. This brings us to the final two states, the states of Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. How will they vote? Let's see. And actually we have Nebraska 2nd District. Let's start by filling in the two tilt Republican states. They include Nebraska 2nd District and Pennsylvania. I think DeSantis does very narrowly win the state of Pennsylvania. Newsom would do pretty well. DeSantis would underperform with blue collar, white working class voters across the more rural areas, but compared to Trump, But I think if DeSantis paints Newsom as like California liberal, which I think he would, as like elitist, like kind of like how Trump did to Hillary, I do think he narrowly pulls out a win in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania would be the closest state of the night. It would be razor thin, but I think DeSantis is just a little bit more. It just has a little bit more appeal. He would still do. He would do better in the Philadelphia suburbs, as well as getting strong white working class appeal, simply because he would portray Newsom the same way Trump portrayed Hillary, as like out of touch elitist. And I think in the end, DeSantis does win Pennsylvania by a very slim margin, especially if DeSantis runs on things like oil and energy, because Newsom is very anti-oil, very anti-fracking, very environmentalist. And so if DeSantis runs on those issues, I think he probably does just as well as Trump in the rural areas, and then and as well as making gains in the Philadelphia suburbs, just because he's a little bit more electable, and has a little bit more appeal to those types of voters. So I think he wins Pennsylvania. It's very competitive and very close, but I think he does narrowly pull off a win in the state. Nebraska second district, very similar story. I think DeSantis has a little bit more appeal to the Nebraska, to the suburbanites. Newsom also has some suburban appeal, which is why I think that a lot of these states are closer than you may think they should be, because Newsom will do a very good job at turning out the Democratic base, and he is a relatively charismatic guy, so I don't think he would get shelled in the suburbs, but I think that he would, because he would turn out the base, but I think he would still probably lose the suburbs very narrowly to DeSantis. So I think Nebraska second district does very narrowly tilt to Ron DeSantis in this scenario. Now, New Hampshire I've been going back and forth on, but I do think in the end it would tilt to Gavin Newsom. New Hampshire is just such a weird state politically. You would think it should vote like the rest of the Northeast, all things considered, but it votes like a very swingy state. It's very libertarian. Neither of these candidates are super libertarian, but I think in the end it just goes to Newsom. It just has that. It always tends to lean a little bit more Democratic than it does Republican, and so because of that, I think Newsom does very narrowly pull off a win in the state. So with that, this is the 2024 prediction between Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom, the two governors of some of the two largest states, the two most popular governors for their respective parties, if you will. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more.